And this one is for the camera, and this one is for the PA system. That way. Alright, let's just get it out there. Just a second, and just don't tuck in yet. We're going to put 2 radios on you.
Oh, dear?
Yeah, that's pain in the neck. So this
If you get it high up on the tie, then I can put the t-shirt and I'll pull the t-shirt down.
Yeah, and that's going to be a noise when you do it. And can you put this one up there?
Yeah, it's a noise when I do it, but then it
doesn't matter. Oh, hang on. Okay, so something there. Just hold that for me, please, Joe.
I don't know what we've lost. There it is, right there.
Yeah, just hold that for a second.
Yeah. Call me Andrew, it's fine.
Okay.
Andrew, I'm just going to introduce you and welcome you and
Yeah, you can. That's nice of you. You're allowed to be abusive and informal.
Right. I've got your
The
bio.
Yeah, well, that's the worst thing you want.
I thought that people...
Hurricane supporter is good.
Which university you graduated
Hurricane
from.
supporter, and ask them when
it would be
the
inappropriate
Canterbury team played the Wellington Lions last Sunday. What was the score? It's a quiz for them. One was 14 and one was 60.
I think that would be culturally
One was 60. No, it'd be culturally very appropriate.
Right. Now, you just tuck all those wires in.
Whereabouts?
Just keep
Whack
them
them
there.
down.
And they turned out.
It's very high tech.
There's your thing, and I'll help once it gets to the video.
Oh, good, you can do that for me. That's great. Have that. Should I have that up here?
Sorry, Judge, while you're busy, I'm just going to adjust this a little bit more. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Oh well, this is. I don't know, we did the sign-up sheets. I was going to get you to bring my phone number that I forgot. I thought
Kia ora tātou, tēnā tātou kua huhui mai nei I tēnei ata, kia whakoroko ki tēnei te tani whānui e hāpai ane ka kaupapa mō wa tātou tamariki mokopuna o te motu, nā reira nau mai, haere mai. Judge Becroft, nei rā te owhātu kia koe, nau mai, tāuti mai ki te whare o te waipaunamu, I ruka anō I o kārakataka, I ruka anō I ka mana, ka hara mai ki tō taha, nau mai e te rakatira, tāuti mai, I ruka anō I tēnei whenua kaituahuriri, tēnā koe. Hoi anō ki a koe Linda, kua hara mai, hei parirau mō tēnei, hei tautoko huki, hei hāpai, ka kaupapa I roto I te tari aro nui atu ki wa tātou tamariki mokopuna, nau mai, tāuti mai, kōrua tahi, tēnā koutou. I'm just going to allow Diamond to start off our koro. Kia ora, Diamond.
Ko Diamond toko inga. No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the meeting. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you for listening.
Kia ora,
Diamond.
I didn't get a choice about that, but I absolutely support it. Okay, so I'd just like to welcome you again. Thank you all for being here. It is an absolutely exciting morning for us all. As you know, with this kaupapa, that Te Runanga o Ngai Tahu, celebrating our 20 years since settlement, since the signing of the deed of settlement, have reenacted, brought to life our Tahu talks, and it was absolutely a pleasure to welcome the Commissioner, Judge Becroft, the Commissioner for Children's Commissioner for New Zealand, to be with us today for this morning, and to launch this kaupapa of ours as well, as you know, our kaupapa for our tamariki and our mokopuna. The man doesn't need an introduction. He's got that many titles. When I'm going through his bio, I'm looking at trying to actually put it into a short, summarised version. so that I do not take up too much time, but it is important to identify at least some of the titles that you have upon you, sir. So, as I've mentioned, Judge Becroft was appointed the Children's Commissioner for New Zealand for a 2-year period from June 2016, and he's already made quite an impact. Prior to that, he was the Principal Youth Court Judge of New Zealand from 2001 to 2006, and was appointed a District Court Judge in 1996. The judge has, as I've said, made quite an impact and a stir already. He's a mover, he's a shaker, he doesn't lie down and let things happen around him. He stands up and shakes the country up and makes us aware of the things that we need to be aware of. And in particular, his passion and commitment for driving change for our tamariki and our mukopuna, our whānau, has been at the forefront of media conversations. It has been at the forefront of his personal drive, and I think it was the whole country was cheering and applauding when he was appointed as the Commissioner for Children. Ngai Tahu, we're in that team. We were there with pom-poms and banners along the side, which is why we're also very excited to have you here today. Unfortunately, he supports the wrong rugby team, and he's not alone in that. We celebrate diversity. We have Julian Wilcox, who's also a member of our team, who has yet to see the light as well, sir. So you're in good company in terms of being supportive for the odd Hurricanes team, but welcome to Canterbury Territory. We're happy that you've seen the light on this day, and we're really excited to listen to you speak. Nā reira, e te rakatira, nau mai haere mai. Kia ora.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rangatira, e ngā wahini toa, e ngā iwi, tēnā koutou. He pai ki te kōrero, kia koutou i tēnei rā, nau mai, haere mai. Ko kaukau te maunga, ko karori te awa iti, no Whanganui ātara ahau, ko te kai komihana mō ngā tamariki o Aotearoa ahau, ko Andrew Becroft takuringa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Working with children is always a challenge and is always interesting, and children are usually not shy in telling you what they think. I was reminded about that at Father's Day recently, and I had a series of cards that I reflected on that just I thought were quite encouraging. The first one said, "Whenever I have a problem, Dad, I always follow your advice." I thought, great, and opened it up, and it said, "And always ask Mum." Dad, about all that trouble when I was growing up, I just want you to know I forgive you. That's from my daughter. And my young son just couldn't wait to give me this card. Excuse the juvenile humour. He was just so excited. Dad, did you know when a man's in his 20s he plays football? In his 30s he plays cricket. In his 40s he plays snooker. In his 50s he plays golf. Isn't it obvious, Dad, as you get older, your balls get smaller? The way into this topic that I've slightly grandiosely called this morning a second chance for evolution, because I think it is. I think we are paused in 2017 to do something that we never did back in 1989, but we could have done. But we've got a second chance, which isn't often granted for a revolution, and these are pivotal times. We have a platform to do what we have never done before. I'm excited by it. But my way into this debate really came through the youth court experience. And I remember the last day that I sat in the youth court was in Manukau, and this boy came before me. And in a way, he epitomised everything I'd seen in the last 15 years. And he was being sentenced for what appeared quite moderate offending, stealing a car and dangerous driving, but actually he'd been stealing cars in South Auckland and then driving them at night onto the off-ramp of the southern motorway, using it as an on-ramp, and playing literal human dodgems, and it was incredibly dangerous. And I just reflected on what I knew about him, because I explained he'd have to be sentenced to 6 months imprisonment in a youth detention centre. And I just reflected on what I knew about him. He'd come from a background of endemic domestic violence. She was just talking to Arahia, who I acknowledged this morning. We had a great breakfast actually this morning, me and I think it was 15 wahine from Ngāi Tahu. But one of the things we discussed on the way over was how disconnected some of our responses are. And I remember there was, before the earthquake, a summary done of the boys in Christchurch who got the most serious, 41 of them, the most serious sentence of a 6 months lock-up prison sentence, really. And 37 of them had come from families where there'd been at least 2 domestic violence call-outs by the police in the previous year. But there'd been no collaboration or talking or involvement of, let alone just the 2 branches of the police who were involved, but the community. So I mean, domestic violence just was a constant thread amongst the boys that I dealt with. He had been physically abused by his father. Substance abuse was endemic in the family. Not surprisingly, he had shown early behavioural issues from about the age of 4. And there was an unproven serious sexual abuse allegation by an older male wider family member. It had been to court, but the older man had been acquitted. I remember the young boy in court saying to me, "But it happened, Judge, I just wasn't believed." He still carried that sense of pain with him. He had had 30 different SIFS placements from the age of 4. 30 different SIFS placements. I thought that was something of a record, but I remembered being in Invercargill a few years before that, and we were thinking about granting bail to a boy for Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I said, "Could you just stay put for Friday, Saturday, Sunday? How hard can it be?" And he said, "Actually, it's really tough. I've had 52 placements since the age of 6, and I find it really hard to stay put." And the SIFS social worker in court said he's right. He's been moved around, and he would have been 15. So in 9 years, he'd had nearly 6 different placements a year. He'd been separated from his siblings. When SIFS decided that he had to be removed from the family, he'd been separated from his siblings. That was another really good thing, I think, that came out of the new Oranga Tamariki legislation, that there was a group of care experienced children and young people who were asked, how could we do it better? And the one thing they said was, if we have to be removed from our whānau, why not keep us together as brothers and sisters? You would have thought that was already in the legislation, but it wasn't. But as a result of that voice from care experienced children, it is now a written principle that priority has been given to keeping brothers and sisters together. He wasn't. Disengaged from education. He'd attended 20 schools, 11 primary schools. Substance abuse from the age of 11. That is a really common age, 11, to start cannabis and alcohol. And his common drink, I read in the summaries of fact, after consuming a tray of Cody's. Now you probably know Cody's and Woodies probably aren't your drink of choice, but they're bourbon and cola mixture, ready to drink, 8% alcohol. Someone in fact sent me a picture from a suburban dairy where a dozen Cody's were being sold in a carton for $12 in total, $1 a can. And in the next door fridge, pump water was $2.80. So we live in parts of New Zealand now where alcohol is cheaper than water. And I'm a mad keen sportsman, and I watch still the Warriors with enormous faith and hope. But I'm always disappointed when they run out and on their left sleeve is the Woodstock sponsorship. And I just think, what a shame that that's the sponsor, when we know that and from the youth court experience, the drink of choice, Cody's and Woodies, were constantly being consumed by under 18-year-olds. I often wonder if the people who make them shouldn't realise that that's the market that it seems is most attractive. So everything in this boy at the time, my last day in the youth court, just hit so many of the issues that we had faced. Out of school for 3 years, but yet he was a talented boy, could have been captain of his first 15. A natural leader, but was self-harming, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And that picture is so common. And almost all the serious offenders in the youth court, yes, they victimise others and abuse others, but they are all damaged and abused and victimised boys themselves. And frankly, not enough work had been done to look at wider whānau or hapu for his placement. It had been a pretty tick box sort of process. He is exactly the example of why we've got a chance to do it better and why we have to do it better. And when it came to sentence and when I explained it would be 6 months, he stopped and said something that no other boy had ever said to me in the youth court. He just said, "Could we have a prayer, Judge?" Which rather threw me, and I said, "Do you want me to pray?" He said, "No, I want to pray." And the sergeant, who's a tough old senior sergeant, said, "Well, he can't pray in the dock, Judge." And I thought that sounded appropriate. So he went around and got him and stood him in the well of the court next to his grandmother, who was the only family member there to support him. And he prayed the most insightful and amazing and moving prayer, talking about his past, saying that he knew he had to be held accountable, but he hoped he would get help. He hoped he would get support, and he hoped he would get assistance. And afterwards, the senior sergeant, not given to these sorts of shows of emotion, gave him a big hug. I mean, bearing in mind the boy was going to prison really for 6 months. And I left the dock I left the bench and shook him by the hand. And I saw him walking out through the dock down into the cells. And I went to see him a month later. He was doing okay, but he'd been spending the day in secure care, effectively solitary confined with adult caregivers, playing chess. And I finished the game of chess with him and he said, "It's going okay, it's been pretty stable, but I'm really worried when I leave because I know I need the help. I haven't had it. There's so much and I just hope the community is there for help." And I think that's a great strapline for what we're talking about today. Are we sure that our tamariki are getting the help that they need? Often the expert help, the consistent help, the help that's there for the long term. Actually, I remember another occasion in the youth court too, where a boy came in and very enthusiastically discarded his hoodie to reveal a t-shirt. Now, I've seen lots of t-shirts in the youth court. I actually got a second copy from his lawyer bought it from the Otawa Flea Market. This is the t-shirt. And he just wore it, if you can't see at the back, he just wore it enthusiastically, just looking at me. And you can imagine that it left me a bit concerned as to how I start the conversation with them, because we emphasise engaging with young people, encourage participation. So I said somewhat lamely, "That's an interesting t-shirt." He said, "All good, boss." And I said, "Well, isn't it early to call yourself a criminal? You haven't been to the youth court before, let alone answered the charge. You're getting ahead of yourself." And his lawyer got up. His young lawyer started to wave and clearly wanted me to shut up and leave it at that. But I continued and said, "Well, I can't fault your theology, but you won't know what theology means." He said, "Yeah, I do. It's about God, isn't it? God stuff." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, as a committed Christian myself," I said, "that's my worldview. I firmly believe there will be perfect youth justice on the other side of heaven." But I said, "The bad news is, today, in the Manukau Youth Court, you're stuck with me, Judge Becroft." And he smiled and, not at all being rude, he just reflectively said, "Well, I hope you get it right." And that's another challenge when we're talking about our tamariki, our children and young people. Are we getting it right? I was in Paraparaumu College a few months ago at a teacher training day, and a young, recently graduated English teacher said, "But do you know where those words come from?" I didn't. Does anyone know where these words come from? So it's not Shakespeare or the Bible, much more up to date. who said, Tupac, you're right. In fact, I looked it up on Google and got the words in full. In fact, when I send the words out, some of them won't go through the MSD firewall. So, but here's the words from I Wonder If Heaven's Got a Ghetto. It ain't a secret, don't conceal the fact. The penitentiary's packed and it's filled with blacks. I wake up in the morning and I ask myself, is life worth living? Should I blast myself? And we live in a community where we have the highest rate of youth suicide under 24 in the Western world. But read the rest of the words. Now, he would have known those words, I am sure. And I wished I had known them, and I wished I could have talked about the sorts of themes in those words. And surely Tupac is saying, on the other side of heaven, will there be an end to marginalisation and inequality and disadvantage? In a sense, our job will not be done until no New Zealand young person could ever identify with those words. Our job is not done until we can say none of our rangatahi would use that as their anthem. So in that context, I have been just so privileged to have the role as Children's Commissioner. It's an enormous opportunity, it's a great challenge, it's a challenge for the whole community. I feel a keen sense of responsibility and a sense of, I guess, anxiety that we do it well. There are, in fact, how many children and young people are there in New Zealand under 18? Quiz question for you. Yes. How many are there under 18? Pardon? 800,000? Do I hear more on 800,000? 800,000? Do I hear more? Less? 2 million? Do I hear more? Planning ahead, it's interesting to reflect on what the 20 years ahead will bring us, because we won't be nearly such a Pakeha European country. And the European Pakeha New Zealand numbers are predicted to drop significantly in the next 50 years, but just in the next 20 years, which is in the It seems to me that our challenges are both for us as individuals and at the macro level, the systemic level. I guess today I particularly want to talk about the macro or systemic level, but there's challenges for each of us individually and how we deal with our own children. I remember Judge Mick Brown, the first Principal Youth Court judge, when I got the role in 2001, he put his big hands on my skinny shoulders and said, "Andrew, it would be a tragedy if you tried to save the youth of New Zealand but lost your own family." He said, "You cannot be involved in working with children and young people until you, first of all, do your absolute best with your own children." And I thought that was a great challenge to me. It's why I tried to keep Saturday, Sundays free for the family. And this boy who definitely was in, I met him in the States, he said, "Take a picture of me." He was in that 10% group. Could have been very like that boy that I talked about at the start. And he said, "Today's Martin Luther King Day," and he said, "This is my individual motto." And it'd be a great motto for all of us. If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. For all of us, with all the young people and children that we come in contact with. But he also said, "There's a challenge for you, Judge, because you can do bigger things." And as we queued for the lettuce, there it was, written out, propped up against a bowl with this quote: "Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." And actually I thought about that quote when I sat having breakfast this morning with the 12 of us. What a powerful and influential group arrayed around that table who could have an enormous systemic influence, could bring about profound changes in the way we have done things in New Zealand. So with those introductory comments, this is what I just want to talk about today. A brief introduction and overview that you've had. And I just want to start by saying in all that we do when we're looking at working with our children, our young people, our tamariki, our rangatahi, the voices of children ought to be our starting point, hearing what children themselves are saying in the context of their whānau, hapu and iwi. I'm not preaching a gospel of individualised approaches, and it's crucial that we understand the child's place within wider family. And I just want to talk about the revolution that started, in a sense, with Puao Te Atatu. And if you haven't read this, it's still fantastic to read. I'm not saying laminate it and put it under your pillow, but I'm almost saying that. It speaks through the decades. It's a terrific little piece that challenges us as to how we can do better with our children. I want to talk about the Children and Young Persons and Their Families Act that really was based on that concern. And there were some early signs of promise until about the 1990s, but really things withered on the vine. There were some serious failures in the so-called revolution that never happened. The revolution really died before it began. And I want to talk about the new legislation and give you a handout, because I think there is, without talking too much the language of the lawyer, there's some real encouragement in the new legislation that's been, I think, missed in some of the debate. And the new legislation itself, it's no longer called the Children and Young Persons and Their Families Act, it's called the Oranga Tamariki Act, or the Children and Young People's Wellbeing Act, and you can choose your name. I think it's the only piece of legislation where it's got two names, and take your pick. We'll be calling it Oranga Tamariki Act in our office, just so you know. And then getting it right the second time with some concluding comments. But hearing the voices of children, one thing I've learnt in this role is we do extraordinarily badly in New Zealand, the whole business of hearing from children, letting children tell us what's important for them. I think we do it appallingly. I mean, I've said this publicly, that in the new education bill, the new Education Act, that Amendment Act that was passed, the Ministry of Education didn't have one, that we know of, one specific focused piece of consultation with young people or children at all. It was unbelievable, I thought. You'd think that'd be the first group you'd be asking for feedback from. In the end, we were told they could come to the select committee hearing, which was, amongst other things, smack bang in the middle of NCA exams. And we did a quick survey, and kids told us some really interesting things. For instance, they said, why can't there be more than one student rep on the board of trustees? Because it's really tough, if you're a student, to be on a board of trustees. Why not have 2 or 3 from different perspectives? It would be much stronger. We wouldn't be talked over so much, and it would really value what we're doing. This little video clip that I'm about to show, albeit with Australian accents, unscripted, just talks about the wisdom of children.
Why does he get $5?
That's just the way it is.
$7. It should be flat out illegal. Like, I'm not joking. I'm not being unreasonable. Women and men should have the same money. They should have 50-50. 60-60. 1 to 120. It should just be how hard you work.
If you do the same work, you should get paid the same money.
What we're trying to tell you is that it's not fair that boys get paid more than girls.
Maybe if the men noticed they were being paid more than the women, they should speak up about it.
When I am older, I'm going to make a change. If I don't forget. Oh, I have no words, it's so wrong.
Children's voices always add quality, always enrich our understanding and improve our processes and operations. And I've been surprised in New Zealand, we talk a good game, but we don't do it well. And I think we really have to ask ourselves, in any government or community or iwi organisation, what are we doing to hear what children are telling us? What are some of the concerns of our children and young people? And you know, we don't do it just for that reason. We do it because they're entitled to do it. And it's interesting that when I put the next slide up, you can see people's eyes glaze over. And in my daughter's terminology, Dad, it's a real debuzz. But we do it because actually children are entitled to it under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. That is the most signed international covenant in history. Every country in the world but one, with the small exception of the United States, has signed it. Every country. And one of the things it says, and I've even taken the picture of it, state parties, that's us, shall assure, I love that word, shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child, the views of the child being given due weight in accordance with the age and maturity of the child. And I've just got a selection of the 52 articles, just 7 of them, that just talk about different rights that our children and young people have, different entitlements. And many of them would resonate with you in the work that you're doing. And I don't know if this video works. Does it work? Right. Well, this is a wee example close to home, where the voices of children had a big impact in the reconstruction plans for the river flowing through Christchurch. Otakaro River.
Protera Christchurch asked many children and adults what they wanted in the new area, and the vision was created from that feedback.
The decisions that we're going to be making over the next wee while will be decisions about what will be there in the future. And that future belongs to you. So it's really important that we get your voices and your ideas because you're going to inherit this legacy.
We loved the idea that there would be places for vulnerable humans to eat and sleep, plus places for weak and endangered animals to grow strong.
I enjoyed the idea that the plan was based around the Avon and used it as the central piece.
We should add a little space for people to come together and meet new people, and the more people, the better, and we should stand together. So two to the left with me.
First up is apartments for homeless people so they can get back on their feet till they earn enough money for a house, so people can donate money, food and clothes to them. I think there should be a water park because there is a river near it, and there should also be a hotel for visitors, people from Japan or the UK.
So this here's my camping ground. And I also strongly believe that we should have less cars and things that have fossil fuels, nowhere near the river. And we also need to start planting more trees and create a forest, because then all the native birds will come back.
A lot of adults don't always realise that just being kids makes us see the world as a place full of possibilities.
Our generation will be living in the new area being built, and we will be the users and the kaitiakitanga, guardians of the environment.
Every New Zealand child has a right to have a say on what is important to them. 1. If our rebuild takes a long time, since we're the next generation, we'll be the ones to enjoy it. And 2, we've got a lot of imagination. We think differently to adults, and we're not afraid to let our imagination run wild. We're still people, and everyone should have a say. I mean, everyone deserves a chance to share their ideas, and not just adults or not just more important people should have a chance. Everyone should.
My favourite thing was just listening to all of the other ideas.
More adults need to think about what kids' voice means, because we will be the next generation in this land. So I think we, adults need to have kids say in it before they kind of go up and build stuff.
We'll be a piece today, so.
So, just by way of introduction and initial challenge, what role do we give to the voices of tamariki and rangatahi in our organisations? And 5 questions just to leave you with. In fact, Hannah, have you got that first handout? That one. Being child-centred. Might be one between 2. Diamond, could you help? Just make sure if we share them, that's the best way. There are 5 questions here that hard to have one between 3, or one between 2, another one. The back row team is in danger. Here, Diamond, I'll grab a few of those. Wait, in fact, can you go down the back too and make sure those good people there aren't left out? And we suggest in the handout there are 5 good questions to ask. How will a decision affect children? Will it affect some children differently? I understand that the Margaret Mayhew playground had to be temporarily closed and rebuilt to allow for kids with disabilities that hadn't been thought about in the first place, which would have been thought about if we'd asked that second question. There's lots of ways about how we can hear children, and we suggest that on our website. Great ways. From smaller focus groups to surveys to child-led tours to creative activities. Yeah, hand out some more, Diamond. Get them all out. Just. And we're not saying children's views always prevail, but we are saying it's important that we factor children's views into decision making, and we report back to children. Thank you, Diamond. We're done. Very good. Those 5 questions are a good overall approach. So having said all of that, the revolution that never was. You know, Puao Te Ata 2 is worth reading. It talks about a crisis. It talks about systemic racism. It talks about a total government failure to understand the role of whānau, hapu and iwi, and that no work can be done for Māori children in particular without understanding the role and place of whānau, hapu and iwi. And the new legislation that resulted in 1989, it truly was revolutionary. You can get that off our website. But you know, the words whānau, hapu and iwi were mentioned 26 times in the legislation, in 26 different places. There was an absolutely crystal clear focus on working with and partnering with whānau, hapu and iwi. It was implicit that iwi would be resourced to be involved. It was a clear, crystal clear vision that people were really excited about. And you know, there were some really exciting developments. I checked with a SIF site manager of the early 1990s in Porirua, and she said they were really concerned. She gave an example where there were 3 children they were really concerned about in Porirua. There were concerns about abuse and neglect from right up north, not Ngāi Tahu, you'll be relieved to hear, but much further north. And a family group conference was put together, but first of all 2 Māori social workers from Porirua went to the far north, talked things through with wider family and hapu, put together a preliminary plan, an initial hui a whānau, and then paid for over 40 whānau, hapu and iwi members to come down by bus, paid for the bus, for 2 days accommodation at a marae in Porirua, and talked through what would happen to the 3 children. And there was, they said, a very positive decision where the children would go north to members of the hapu, would be supported with good communication, support, assistance for the family, and assistance back for the whānau in Porirua too. And I told that story actually at the Iwi Leaders Justice Forum that Joe, I don't know if Joe's here, that Joe was at. Yes. And several people came up to me and said, we've never heard of a family group conference like that. We've never heard of a family group conference when the state would pay for 40 plus members of our hapu to come from the far north to Wellington, pay for 2 days on a marae, pay for the food, facilitate it, and give constant support to both the family in Porirua, left behind, her hurting mother, and supporting the hapu. They said that never happened. We never heard of a family group conference like that. But it used to happen. That was the model. That was the dream. That was the vision. But you know, by the early 90s, it would be fair to say that it started to wither on the vine. I mean, have you ever heard of a family group conference like that? Just anybody here? You have recently?
No, my daughter, we had 102 at the family group conference, but that was in the year 2000.
Yeah.
And involved the whānau hapu an area of 3 different fathers. So we had 10 children in the FGC. And it was amazing. That's how you should discuss the best interest of these 10 babies, is to have everyone concerned in the same, at Marae, 2 days up in Auckland.
Well, that's encouraging to hear, because I think that is the model, but we have fallen so far short, I think.
I've never seen it in 20 years.
You've never seen it in 20 years?
I did, because I was a practitioner. I was a social work practitioner, and in actual fact, the funding was completely different in the early days once the legislation came through, and as it moved towards, I was a practitioner from 1981 right through to 2005. Over those years, it just diminished significantly, and the resources just weren't there.
Let me give you some examples from my perspective of what you might call the failed revolution. At the iwi Leaders Justice Group, one of the big thrusts was, why can't we have an iwi voice in the family and the youth courts? Why can't we? Surely we should. In fact, that's exactly what Puao Te Atatu recommended, that iwi voice should be heard and there should be provision for it. And in fact, it's exactly what the Act provided for, little known. The Act provided for a role called a lay advocate or a community representative to provide cultural advice and to represent the interests of hapu and iwi, whānau, hapu and iwi. That law provided for it in '89. It set it all out. Anyone could ask for it to be appointed. They were the two principal functions. Exactly what people have been asking for was exactly what was provided for back in 1989 and was never operationalised. It just never happened. Even better, was paid for by the consolidated fund from money appropriated by Parliament for the purpose. The only trouble is Parliament never had to appropriate any money for that purpose because no lay advocates were ever appointed. But it was there. The vision was there that every decision in a family or youth court would never be made without an iwi voice. And this is a bit of a true confession coming up now. In the Act, in section 208C, one provision said that any measure for dealing with offending by children and young people, any measure, so that's any time a child or young person offends, any measure should be designed to strengthen the family, whānau, hapu, iwi and family group of the young person concerned, and to foster the abilities of families, whānau, hapu and iwi and family groups to develop their own means of dealing with offending by their young persons. Now, here's the confession. I read those words for 15 years as Principal Youth Court Judge. And the words hapu and iwi may as well have been twinked out of my copy of the legislation. I mean, I read them, but I never absorbed them. In my defence, they may as well have been twinked out of every lawyer's copy of the Act and every social worker's copy of the Act, because I never once read a report about a young person who had offended that set out how what was being proposed would strengthen the whānau, hapu and iwi. It was never addressed, it was never considered. It became a dead letter, I've got to say. And isn't that a tragedy? I mean, the legislation provided for something that really never happened, and I was part of a system. And all of us should take responsibility that never consciously addressed those issues, at least in my time. I honestly can't remembering a report. That boy who I talked about last day in the youth court, to my conscious memory, there was nothing in that report saying how his hapu and iwi could be involved in what was done and how what was being proposed for his supervision after he left prison would strengthen his hapu and iwi. That's not the language that was ever being used. But it was the language of the '89 Act, and it was set up for a revolution. The good thing is it's still there. Both those provisions are still there. They haven't changed. And when we look at another example, we have in our youth justice prisons now, there are 4 of them, youth justice residences. Nearly 80% of those there, at least 70%, are on remand, just waiting for their case to be sorted out. The legislation actually says there are 2 or 3 areas that a young person can be remanded to, 3 people. The custody of the chief executive, the custody of an iwi social service, the custody of a cultural social service. I have never in 15 years remanded a young Māori boy in particular to an iwi social service. They go to the chief executive and they go out to the name of which is just Te Punawai or Tuhanapu. That's where they go. The chief executive's custodial, metre-high, escape-proof concrete facility. They could go to an iwi social service. They could go to Ngāi Tahu. There could be Ngāi Tahu-run community family homes. And I'm not saying that, there are some boys in particular who are very volatile, need some stability, at risk to themselves as much as anything else, might need an absolutely secure environment. But there are many people in our residences, and I know that the current Principal Youth Court Judge, a very dear colleague, has said we're turning the key on too many boys who don't need to be locked up, who could be dealt with if there were good, secure oversight and supervision of them in the community. Well, that's an opportunity for Ngāi Tahu. It was an opportunity for every iwi since 1989, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to find even 5 formal remands under the Act into the custody of an iwi social service. But it could completely remove a whole group of boys who don't need to be locked up at the moment, but could be well supervised by their iwi. That's such a concern to me. Family group conferences, it would be overstating it to say they were a Māori model, but they certainly had much in the way that they were set up and operated that was consistent with a Māori worldview. But very quickly in the late 90s, early 2000s, they shrunk to become, in youth justice, too often, a young offender, mother or grandmother, police officer. And in care and protection too. It's great, Helen, to have 100. But you said you'd never heard of a family group conference like that. Well, 75% of conferences across New Zealand, I think 2015, were held in CIFS offices. Isn't it ironic, and it's so often the case, that revolutions that start off with inspiration can easily become, in the end, that which they were designed to replace. And the 89 model was to replace an institutionalised, government-dominated, expert-driven approach. But when 75% of conferences are held in CIFS offices with an over-representation of government officials proportionately, because work hasn't been done to get wider whānau, hapa and iwi there, we've become exactly what it was that we tried to replace in 89. So they are little, I guess, examples of our failure. And it concerns me hugely that we had the chance in 89 delivered on a plate, but we didn't grab it. In many areas, but particularly in the area of whānau, hapu and iwi collaboration, partnership and empowered involvement in the system. There were some glimpses of hope. Moana Iruera and Leland Refu have developed Toku Tumuana, a Māori framework for social work. And in the youth court, the Māori judges took the courageous lead of moving some cases after a family group conference onto the marae. And you've got that here in Christchurch at Nahoe Whā. And they're using lay advocates, community advocates, representing the voice of Hapua and iwi. I don't know, can we play... we'll probably take out that, because there's a rangatahi court video. How many of you have seen the video about the rangatahi courts? You can see it on YouTube. It's 6 minutes long. I don't think we've got it, have we? But it's easily obtained. It just tells you about what's going on. Talks about that initial vision back in '89. So I thought I'd close by telling you something about the new legislation, because, you know, I'd say this. However good the '89 legislation was, eventually what we've got now is better. Eventually, overall, what we've got now is better. It's got almost all the things I talked about still there, but after a bit of behind-the-scenes raru and public turmoil, I think the result that's been obtained is better. The Charter for a Revolution is stronger. Essentially the same foundation and contact as the '89 Act, but stronger and with a clearer focus on dealing with Māori children, young people and their whānau. What is really interesting, and we can, Diamond, you're on. Can you hand all those out again? Easy peasy, good on you. All right, you do your side, I'll do mine.
What side?
This side. You might just have to share this, but this is just some of the new provisions. And if you just look at the 3 new universal concepts to begin with, that's easy, 2 there. More coming, I hope, for you. But that's one table, you can pass them around. What's been added to the legislation is what's been called in Wellington at least 3 PO, or 3 central ridgepoles, guiding principles, mana tamaiti, whakapapa, whanaunatanga. And they're all described in the legislation. You haven't got a copy, have you? Just have a look at how the legislations define those 3 principles. And I'm here with Linda from the office, but I know you have been talking a lot about those 3 principles with Oranga Tamariki, haven't you?
Yes.
About how they can be operationalised.
Absolutely.
Do you want to say anything about?
I guess what we're seeing is the mandate for us to bring whakapapa whanaunatanga back into the kōrero with our statutory partners. And the office is developing a Māori lens monitoring framework tool. And we did a little exercise, there's 6 principles in there. We did a little exercise with some policy people at Oranga Tamariki. And we asked them to write under a notelet what were 2 things that they wanted to see from mokopuna for children when they come to the notice of Oranga Tamariki. And then we put them up into the framework under the 6 values. So the values are whakapapa, whanaunatanga, aroha, manaakitanga, rangatiratanga, mātauranga. There was 1 notelet from a group of 20 people sitting in between whakapapa and whanau. Every other area was covered, which showed us quite clearly what the focus is of the statutory organisation, which is what we want Oranga Tamariki to move into. Value the mana of our children, our whakapapa and our whanau. And we have the mandate here, it's now in legislation.
And what's really interesting, you know, is when this was in the proposed form, each of those three definitions were restricted to Māori children. Mana tamaiti means in respect of Māori children, or tamariki Māori, the following. Whakapapa, in relation to a person who is Māori. It's quite exciting. Many of us argued strongly that those for a Māori restriction gets pulled out. We said if the principle is good, it should be a universal principle for all our children. And that's a gift, in a sense, from Māori culture to the legislation. So that slipped in without many realising that they're principles that will have to be applied to all children touched by oranga tamariki. And if you go down to the new section 7AA, it's quite exciting if you read that the duties of the Chief Executive set out in subsection 2 are imposed in order to recognise and provide a practical commitment to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. Look what the Chief Executive, Gráinne Moss, who's coming down to see you shortly, this is a good thing you can ask her about. Look what the Chief Executive must ensure. Policies and practice of the department that impact on the well-being of children and young persons should have the objective of reducing disparities by setting measurable outcomes for Māori children. B, just what we talked about, the policies, practices and services of the department must have regard to mana tamaiti, whakapapa, whanaunatanga. C, this is really exciting for you. The department must seek to develop strategic partnerships with iwi and Māori organisations, including iwi authorities, in order to provide opportunities to and invite innovative proposals from those organisations to improve the outcomes for Māori children. I thought about what you talked about the first 1,000 Days initiative at Invercargill. Well, that's something you could regard as an innovative proposal. It's a good question to ask, what does the word strategic partnership mean? I'd argue for it means the fullest and most resourced partnership that could be imagined to bring about change. It won't just mean a memorandum of understanding, but it might include that. Set expectations and targets to improve outcomes for Māori children and young persons who come to the attention of the department. And look at Roman numeral 4, provide opportunities for the Chief Executive to delegate functions under this Act or regulations made under this Act to appropriately qualified people within these organisations. Tūhoi already have employed ex-SIFS social workers who are effectively doing family group conferences, although there has to be a legally appointed coordinator in the room, but they're doing the conference for Tūhoi tamariki in Whakatane. And look at 2A, out here, just gives you a little bit of a leg in there. One or more iwi or Māori organisations may invite the Chief Executive to enter into a strategic partnership. 2B, the Chief Executive must consider and respond to any invitation. Public reporting. It's all, I think, got them all there. I think it's a much more, actually it's a much more plain and simple obligation placed on the Chief Executive to front up and actually work with iwi and partner with iwi and help resource iwi and develop new programs. It's terrific, the opportunity that's there. And I'll just finish with the new section 13, which is amended. It's really the care and protection principles. I'll just take you to a few. Have a look at E. This is much clearer. a much clearer mandate to get involved before there needs to be a removal of a child, but to get in much earlier. In the past, this would say the statutory bar is removal, we can't be involved before then. E is much clearer. Assistance and support should be provided unless it is impracticable and reasonable to do so to assist families, whānau, hapu and iwi and family groups where there's a risk of removal. And that's new. And if I'll leave it to read those later, but if you go over the page, the one that would be of interest to you is, actually it starts at the bottom, I. The placement should, and it's really Roman numeral 3 capital A. That was the big discussion, raru public controversy debate about should preference or priority be given to a child or young person to be placed with a member of the child or young person's wider family, whānau, hapu, iwi. What's been added in is able to meet their needs, including for a safe, stable and loving home. But who would seriously argue that that wasn't always an underlying principle anyway? So the word preference used to be priority where practicable. Now it's preference. I mean, you could argue forever as to whether that's any meaningful difference. Preference, priority where practicable. If you go down to C, D that we talked about, all new. If you go down to J, Roman numeral 2, that's new. Roman numeral 3, new. And that's just a selection of new statutory provisions. So I close where I started. You don't often get a chance for a revolution a second time. We've got it. New Zealand's got the chance. The legislation's delivered it on a plate. The question is, are we up for it? Tell you, lawyers, much less judges, don't usually use the language of revolution. I mean, we are a pretty conservative and cautious group, and rightly so. But in terms of this legislation, it's fair to say there's a revolution that could take place in the way we deal with our children and young people. Are we up for it? We in with that question mark. We've got the opportunity. In a sense, iwi, from my perspective, looking in, have never been better resourced. The platforms are laid. What was hard to do in '89 could be done now. And if the group that I had breakfast with is any representation of the commitment that Ngāi Tahu has, we're in for some exciting times. And maybe we'll see the revolution. I wanted to close with a final T-shirt. Do you mind? You've seen this one, Hannah. On the way through, a formerly incarcerated family in the States I saw, they said, we didn't do well, but please take a picture. That's our family motto, our family T-shirt, each generation better. But this T-shirt, how many of you know where this T-shirt comes from? Olympic Games, you know, Mexico, 68. The background was the US track team had decided not to go because of the racial unrest in the States. I think Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. So their protest was not to go. But actually they decided they'd go, but they would protest. And race after race, which they won, they wimped out on, in their own words. But they were certain they'd win the 200 metres. First, second, third. Actually, the Australian Peter Norman came second and ruined their plan. Got a question, Diamond?
When was the T-shirt made? Like what year?
I don't know. I bought it in Melbourne, but it's a 68 event, probably made just a few years ago, I'd say. Pardon?
68, was it?
1968 event, but it wasn't made in 68. The picture was 68. Anyway, they went to Peter Norman and said, Peter, this is your medal ceremony. You weren't meant to be second. We were meant to be first, second, third. But it's your medal ceremony. Do you mind if we do the Black Power salute? And he said, look, I'm a Salvation Army boy from Melbourne. I know of the racial unrest. I stand with you. I'll wear, and he did, I'll wear it's either that one or that one, an Athletes Against Racism badge. I stand with you. Do it. You have my blessing. And Tommy Smith, who came first, said, we've got a problem. John Carlos has forgotten his gloves. So it was Peter Norman who said, Tommy, you'll have to wear it on the right hand, and John, you'll have to break with tikanga and wear it on the left, which is why they've got it on different fists. And all hell broke loose, and you know the result. Smith and Carlos got banned from the games and banned from the US athletics world and never ran for the States again. Peter Norman ran the fourth fastest time in the world in 72 to qualify for Munich, hugely excited. But he wasn't selected. They didn't want to select him because he wore that little tin badge. And the way they did it was to select no Australian sprinters that year. So he didn't go. The story is all told on a great DVD called Salute, and in it you see the final funeral service in the Salvation Army Citadel in Melbourne of Peter Norman. I think about 2008, 2009. You see his coffin being carried out. And front left and front right are Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who flew all the way from the States because they said Peter Norman's a hero in our eyes because he had moral courage and conviction. And he had values that he lived by. When the pressure came on, he stood up and was prepared to be counted. I think that's our challenge in a different way now. 2017, our challenge is, are we prepared to stand up and be counted? The legislation has given us the platform. The legislation provides the vision. The dream is there. The question is, will we put it into practice? And I think that's our challenge, and that's what we're committed to in our office, and that's what I hope the whole country can be committed to. And we will be as encouraging, as supportive, and give as much assistance as we can in that role that we all have. Tēnā koutou katoa.
E te raketira, kua tūwhera koe ka hine karo te rōpū whakaroko nei I tēnei ata. Kua hīkaka no te manawa, ko mātou o ngai tahu, kei muri I a koe e tautoko ana I a koe me waumahi I roto I te kumihana. Kia mōhio koe, ko koutou, ko mātou, ko tātou katoa kei te huarahi kotahi. So just thank you, e te rakatira, for your wonderful speech with us today. We are invigorated. You might have heard this morning we were a little bit invigorated beforehand as well.
Yeah.
No pressure, we will change the world. But just to know that so that you know that Ngai Tahu are absolutely behind the kaupapa that you are driving for all of us and for all of our children in the Commission, and you personally as well. What you are striving for, we are also striving for, and we will get there together. We will have a new revolution. So without further ado, I'll ask everybody to join with me in thanking Judge
specifically on the song relevant to my Tahu.
And as Diamond said, we'd like now to have a break and have some morning tea. Kia ora. You can line up as per Diamond's instructions, as you wish. Kia ora koutou.
Sorry, Hannah, I got a bit, as I always do, carried away with the... Sure, I don't think you've heard that story, but you might have done.